because what we really want right now is beyond anything acceptable in conventional politics. We are therefore attracted to politicians who are unconventional, who break the rules of the political game. One of those candidates was Donald Trump, who even when, this is a paradox a bit, even when he is telling a conscious lie, he's still authentic. There's an authenticity to him even in his prevarication. That attracts people because it is a kind of as I said, a violation of the rules. And we think maybe this person will stick up for what's right in violation of the rules more generally as he represents us in office. So I think that any candidate, it goes against the grain if you're a candidate to actually expose yourself for real, to actually tell the truth, it's hard. I mean, I'm a public speaker too. And I notice within me the desire to appear authoritative, to not show myself, to give the impression that I'm an expert, to present an image of myself that will make you like me, to be inauthentic, in other words. And, when I do that, I think people are a little smarter than I think, because I think that they can see through it. They can see through the fake smile. On some level, you can detect bullshit. You can see through the soaring rhetoric that you've learned in imitation of Martin Luther King or something like that. You can hear through the pseudo-poetic voice or the contrived emotion. And then you don't trust that person. Maybe you can't even name what it is, but you just this person is a functionary. This person is a stuffed suit. This person is a political operative. They're not real. So here again, it's a matter of not caring so much whether you win will help you win. I think that any candidate who has at least some degree of authenticity in that way will have a huge advantage in these times. The ordinary political calculus is no longer valid. In the last election, back in 2016, a lot of people who ended up voting for Donald Trump in the primary voted for Bernie Sanders, who was the other somewhat authentic candidate. It's not a matter of ideology. Trump and Sanders disagree on almost every issue. But that's not why people are voting. The issues are just a means of identity formation. Well, not just, okay? I'm not saying that there's no real differences in the issues. I have opinions on the issues as they are currently constituted, although usually my opinion is not on the spectrum of normal opinion at all. It's usually somewhere off that spectrum. Nonetheless, my point is that people who voted for Sanders then voted for Donald Trump, which leaves us open to fascist demagogues and people who can act well and give the impression of authenticity. But if you can really focus on the real thing, and if that authenticity goes along with a strength of character and a willingness to be wrong, and that's also rare in a politician, a willingness to admit that you were wrong and not about some minor thing. That's called the fake apology. That isn't actually very vulnerable, but to really admit that you were wrong about something. That's the kind of candidate that we need. More important than authenticity would be humility in a political candidate in these times, because almost everybody in the political establishment is wrong about almost everything, in my opinion. A real leader is somebody who has the courage to realize that in the midst of a crisis. The situation right now is not about finding a competent manager to administer the status quo. Yeah, sometimes people will say, okay, Charles, but which candidate are you voting for? I'm not saying that it's not important to choose the right candidate, but maybe it's not the most important question. By centering that as the most important political question, or the most important thing, the first question you ask, by centering it, you're participating in maintaining a worldview in which this is the most important thing. You're participating in a worldview in which, yeah, these are the people who have the most power, and this is how the world is going to change. Therefore, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the election. The entire news cycle is all about the election, the election, the election. What is missing when everything is about the election? What stories are not considered? What human experiences, what events are not considered? Basically, anything that doesn't somehow impact electoral politics and doesn't fit into the narrative of this horse race gets ignored, which is pretty much everything important right now. So I'm not saying it's not important, but let's not contribute to the spectacle. There's a lot of other things to pay attention to right now. And if your natural inclination is drawn to those other things, even in the midst of the election, I say more power to you. Trust those things. Don't buy into the frenzy. Well, Charles, that's very privileged of you, because if you were one of the downtrodden who's going to really suffer if the so-and-sos get elected, if the Republicans get elected, you're not going to, as a white male, nothing bad will happen to you. But if you're an immigrant, or if you're a black person, or if you're a gay person, then you're really going to suffer. So it's all very well for you to say electoral politics aren't the most important thing, but not for a person of color, et cetera, et cetera. And that just brings me back to the observation I've made a few times, that whichever party is elected, it's just a matter of moving the marker in the tug of war a little bit this way or a little bit that way. The fundamental conditions that generate poverty, oppression, racism, misogyny, these do not change according to who is administering a system in which these things are built in at a very deep, almost invisible to us, unconscious level. You can still participate in the election without necessarily hinging upon it. Everything's going to change because of this election. It's still worthwhile to participate in the election. So I'm not advocating political passivity or apathy. But let me give an example. Racism. What is actually the cause of racism? What is racism? At its root, racism is a form of dehumanization. You are making somebody less than fully human based on the color of their skin, or their appearance, or the way that they speak. Same thing with homophobia. It's reducing somebody to less than fully human because they are gay. Transphobia, same thing. Xenophobia, same thing. Misogyny, to reduce a woman to a slightly lesser version of a human being, that is also a kind of dehumanization. So the basic template of racism is dehumanization. That is the field that racism sits very naturally within. If you have a belief that some people are just less of a being than other people, you are contributing to the field of racism, to the field of homophobia, to the field of xenophobia, to the field of misogyny. That dehumanization can take the form of the war tactics that we use upon the political opponent. How could they advocate such policies? They must be less than me. They must be less moral. They must be less intelligent. They must be less of something fundamental to their humanity. Otherwise, because if I were them, I wouldn't do such a thing. If I were Donald Trump, if I were an oil executive, if I were a banker, if I were on the Federal Reserve, I wouldn't do that. I would be so much better. That is a form of dehumanization. Any kind of judgment like that is a form of dehumanization. If I were that white supremacist, I would not. If I were him, I wouldn't be a white supremacist. But do you really know that? Do you really know that if you grew up in his circumstances, if you had his parents, if you lived in his community, if you had his totality of life experience, are you sure that you wouldn't be just as he is? If you think otherwise, you may not be a racist, but you are a dehumanizer, and you are contributing to the field of racism. So, if you're voting for, if you care deeply about racism, certainly vote for the candidate that represents your beliefs, that is committed to bringing equity and fairness, to healing these wounds in society. But don't think that that's the most important thing that warrants dehumanizing that person's opponent, smearing him with whatever labels, taking whatever he said out of context to make it look even worse. That happens all the time on both sides of the political spectrum. You're trying to get that guy, so you pour through all of his public statements and everything he's ever written and all of his videos, and you take something, you extract something that makes him look really, really bad. And then you accompany it with the most unflattering photograph of that person that you can. Here he is. This is who you're considering voting for. Isn't he horrible? Where's the respect there? What kind of world do we want to live in? Wouldn't we like to live in a world that's based on reverence for all beings, where you take the photograph of your opponent and you look for the one that best demonstrates his divinity? And they're doing that to you as well. And you look, and don't you want to live in a world where Israelis look at Palestinians and see their divinity, and where white people look at black people and see their divinity? That's one of the things that we can serve, whether or not we are directly involved in politics. And I would say, let that be our number one priority. Let that be the God that we serve. Let that be the morphic field that we generate, the field of reverence, that we are among sacred beings, human beings and other than human beings. The field of reverence. Now, doesn't that seem so ridiculously far removed from politics as we know it? That it's almost, yeah, okay, that's spirituality, that's philosophy, fine, yes, of course, reverence for all beings, but now, here we have a real situation. This candidate, he's going to do this, he's going to do that, he's going to start a war. So we got to stop him. I want to bring the political back into union with the philosophical and the spiritual. Ultimately, the political is built upon the deeper stories, the mythology. It's an outgrowth of it, which is what I was saying before, that any act is a political act. Anything in service to a transition in our stories is in service to a political revolution as well. And that's why I say, as you support your candidate or your party, do it in a spirit of reverence. Even when that seems politically naive, if you can hold the spirit of reverence and emanate the morphic field of reverence, then even if you lose the election, you will still have won. You will still have contributed to the 500-year plan of healing. And because times are changing, maybe you won't lose. In fact, maybe this is the only chance you have to win. I'm aware that some of what I've been saying kind of sounds like, oh, it doesn't matter which candidate you vote for, they're all the same, and here we are, aloof from politics and above it all. That's not quite it. There are very real differences as far as they go among the various candidates. Real harm is being caused by certain politicians that might not be caused by other politicians. However, the underlying movement is toward pretty much the same result. So, for example, with immigration, as long as you have, I've talked about this before, as long as you have conditions that are deeply systemic, that are driving people to emigrate from their homelands, then you're going to have a very difficult situation with real differences of opinion. What are you going to do with all these people that are coming in, seeking improvement of their lives, seeking to escape desperate circumstances? The tensions that are manifest as the intense debate over immigration will not go away. These tensions are always going to be here, and they might shift one way or shift another way, but as long as that deeper issue is not addressed, then yeah, there is something of a difference between the candidates, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem. So, and the same thing with the environment. You know, the most recent administration in the United States has relaxed all kinds of environmental restrictions that's allowing all kinds of damage to be happening, all kinds of deforestation and mining and pollution of waterways and so forth. The underlying pressure for that to happen will not go away even if we have a new president who changes those regulations and becomes more strict again. It does make a difference. I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference. And I would vote for the candidate who will, as best as he or she is able, protect the environment. But it's not the fundamental solution. It's like this. It's like you're at a restaurant, okay? And you have a menu. And you're hungry. You've got to eat dinner. And here's, you know, the vegan kale salad, you know, and here's the Impossible Burger, and here's the sustainably caught salmon, and here's the whatever. Like, okay, here's a whole bunch of menu options. But what if what you really want isn't on the menu to begin with? What if what you really want is so far off the menu that the chef doesn't even know the name of that dish? And that's what you're deeply craving. But it's not on the menu. And you're like, gosh, I really don't want anything on the menu. And your friends who are sitting there with you are like, but you're hungry. You have to choose something. And surely the sustainably whatever is much better than the factory farmed meat burger. So are you saying that it doesn't matter what you pick? Well, yeah, maybe it does matter. Yeah, from what's available, I prefer the root and berry compote over anything else. But to make that the end of the conversation means that you'll never get what you really want. By making that the whole conversation, you're contributing to the idea that this is all that's available. By making this the frenzied, frenetic focus of all of our political attention, all of our conversation, everything in the media, it's all about this menu. We forget that there's anything off the menu. In fact, what we are hungry for as a society, every single thing that we really need right now is totally off that menu. Some things are just a little bit off the menu and the chef kind of knows about them in the back of his mind, and some of them are not even a blip on the radar. Maybe I'll even speak about some of the dominant political issues that focus our attention and what that focus causes us to ignore, and maybe some of the other things that we could be thinking about and that we could begin to bring onto the menu of our political discourse. Sometimes I see professors and pundits kind of shaking their head and clucking their tongues at the American public and our political system, which is so focused on the personalities and not the issues. And that if someone is serious about politics, then they're going to engage the issues. They're going to find out what a politician's position is on the issues. Well, there's a little problem here, because who decides what issues are the issues? By embracing a certain set of issues as the issues, you are affirming a value system that centers some things and leaves other things at the periphery. And as I said before, the things that get left to the periphery might just be the most important things of all. So to even engage in a conversation about, say, gun control, you are subtly affirming that, yes, this is the thing that we should be talking about. You're already creating policy and creating an agreement by even engaging a certain conversation. So that doesn't mean that I don't have a position on the issues, one by one. Each issue, yeah, I probably have opinions just like everybody else. But do I think that this is the most important thing that we should be talking about right now? That is one of the hidden agreements that underlies polarized positions. A general principle that I carry as I look at pretty much anything happening in the political realm. It's an aphorism that you might adopt, or a mantra even. You could say that the key to unlocking any polarized issue lies in those things that both sides agree on unconsciously, lies in the questions that neither side is asking, and the unconscious assumptions that both share. One of those assumptions is that, yes, this is the thing that we should be talking about. So as far as gun control, which if you're like European or something, you're like, what? Like, this is an issue? But yeah, in America, this is a huge issue. In the United States, it's a gigantic issue. And what are the things that are not being asked about gun control? It would be like, why do people love their guns so much? It's this kind of ritual. They take them out and they shoot them, and they have these. They're like then when they're done, they put them in a little shrine in their house. It's very much a ritual practice. And what need does that meet? Who do they identify as, and what do they believe that they are a part of, and what do they associate with those guns? These are symbolic implements. They're not actually useful for anything. Thank God. I mean, sometimes somebody does use them for what they were manufactured for, and that's called a mass shooting. But generally, they're not useful. Most of them never get used for anything but display and noise. And I'm not including hunters. My brother is a farmer in rural Pennsylvania. Like, everybody has a gun, and it's part of the procuring of the food supply, and this is a completely different culture. So I'm not talking about hunting weapons. That would be a whole other very polarizing topic, I'm sure, because who knows, half of you might be vegans and another half might be paleo, and we could actually use that as an entree into the topic of polarization. And what do you shut out, and what do you let in, and how do you identify, and how important is it to be right? You can serve being right, or you can serve the truth. Each has their payoff. Anyway, that's a little diversion. But just getting back to the issues, the debate, what we decide is important, and what, by defining a certain thing as the issue, we therefore decide isn't important. So let me move on to another issue that is very present for many people, climate change. So here we have a very polarized, again, a highly polarized situation where some people, and it's kind of more of a spectrum. On one end, there are I would call them the catastrophists, that think that we have an imminent, irreversible spiral of runaway global warming that is fed by multiple feedback loops, methane hydrates and melting ice caps, and that basically calamity is in our near future, the collapse of civilization, possible human extinction. Maybe there's still a window of opportunity for us to drastically cut carbon emissions and avert catastrophic global warming. That would be one pole. And the other pole is like, this is scientifically unfounded, the science is distorted, there's institutional confirmation bias within the institution of science, and fraudulent data, and a ulterior agenda to use climate change as an excuse to implement a socialist one-world government run by these crazy greenies and environmentalists. Like, that's another pole of this polarized debate. So what are the hidden agreements here? Well, one of them is that the most important environmental issue to talk about is greenhouse gases. That is what the conversation should be about. Another hidden agreement is that the greatest threat to humanity is global warming. Another hidden agreement is that the conversation should be about whether humanity is going to suffer disastrous consequences or not. The kinds of consequences that we can measure in terms of economic collapse, population collapse, and so forth. All of these are questionable agreements, and I'm not going to go too deeply into this. I wrote a book on climate change, and basically what I say in the book is that when we shift our perspective to see the world as a living being, not as like some complicated machine where if the air-fuel mixture is off, then the machine stops working, but to see it as a living organism, then we can understand that its organs are things like soil, water, wetlands, rainforests, whales, any species, any ecosystem. All of these are the organs of a living being. And if the organs are degraded and destroyed, then the planet dies of organ failure. And then this will happen whether or not we cut carbon emissions. We could cut them to zero overnight, but if we continue to destroy the forests and the wetlands and the whales and the fish and the sea turtles and the amphibians and the insects through all of our development practices, mining, overfishing, pollution, etc. If we continue to do this, then it won't matter if we cut emissions or not. And in fact, that a lot of the things that we attribute to global warming are actually the result of soil destruction and deforestation. And therefore, this whole conversation is actually unnecessary. And that maybe what we should bring from off the menu and put it back onto the dinner table is restoration and regeneration and protection, which used to be the centerpiece of environmentalism back in the 1960s and 1970s. It wasn't save the whales because otherwise bad things will happen to us. It was save the whales because they are magnificent and we love them. So this is another item that I would like to put on the menu, which is, as I keep saying, a revolution of love, to turn that toward this planet and say, yeah, even if we don't value living soil for its carbon sequestration, even if we don't value the Amazon for its carbon storage and its cycling of oxygen, we love these beings. And we know that as we serve them, that their well-being will be our well-being in some way. We will be richer for their wealth and for their health. We will be healthier for their health. We are in this together. This idea is simply not on the spectrum of opinion within climate discourse, especially in politics. So, do I have an opinion on whether global warming is happening or not? Yeah, I have an opinion. I'm not even going to share it because I don't think it's important and I don't want to contribute to the noise around that issue. If we practiced land regeneration, you've heard of it probably, regenerative agriculture. I think alongside rainforest protection, that's the most important thing that humanity can do right now. If we practiced that, carbon wouldn't be an issue because regenerative agriculture actually does sequester huge amounts of carbon, but that's not the reason to do it. It's because soil is an organ and it's beautiful and it's sacred. The rainforests are an organ, they're beautiful, they're sacred. The wetlands, same thing. The whales, same thing. The elephants, we can feel the sacredness of these. Why do people like to go whale watching? Okay, maybe they want to have fancy pictures to show their friends. They want to put the experience in their spiritual backpack and say, yes, I did that, I saw that. But there's something else too. Something is stirred in us, something is awakened in us, that part of ourselves that is the whale. I want that to be on the political agenda, that kind of conversation. Because only that degree of care is really going to move us in a new direction. We cannot continue to allow those kind of conversations, those kinds of stirrings, those feelings, to remain on the margins, to remain outside of acceptable political speech. Got to bring those in. We have to put everything on the table. The fullness of the human experience. Bring that into the collective conversation, into the collective mind, as expressed in politics. Otherwise, politics won't take those data points into account. And we will enact collective decisions that ignore those dimensions of human experience. And we will collectively create a world, because we don't value the whales, we will create a world in which there are no longer any whales. Because what's important? It's keeping ahead of the Russians in submarine sonar technology. Do you know the damage that naval testing of sonar does to whales? Those blasts of sound, they cause the whales to have brain hemorrhages and burst eardrums. And they disrupt the communication web that whales extend over the entire ocean. They can hear each other's songs from hundreds of miles away. Not if they're drowned out by sonar, though. That needs to be part of the conversation. The Gaian mind of which whales are a part. Each whale is a neuron in a gigantic mind that spans all of the oceans. And that includes every creature in the oceans. I want that issue to be included in the domain of the practical and the pragmatic. Practical or pragmatic is a function of what our goals are. It's a function of what we value. If we value outpacing the Russians, then those things aren't important. Advanced sonar is more important. So my call to bring things that are outside of the menu of political discourse back on to the table, that's part of a more general movement toward inclusivity, to recognize and to welcome back all of the beings that we've pushed to the margins, and all of the parts of ourselves, all of the human capacities and gifts that we've also pushed to the margins, to bring into our awareness the unseen truths. I spoke about this before, to make the unseen seen again, to make it visible. That includes all of the horrible, tragic events that are happening all over the world that get ignored, because if we brought them in, our way of life right now would be intolerable. If you knew what it takes to make a cell phone, what happens in the Congo to strip those rare earth minerals from the places that used to be the Congo rainforest, the second largest rainforest in the world, if you knew the social misery that's caused by that industry there and the geopolitics around it, if you knew that, you would not be so eager to get the new iPhone as soon as it comes out. When you looked at that device, you wouldn't only see its technical wizardry and its design aesthetic. I'm not an iPhone hater. There is a beauty in these devices. And I mean, they are an incredible, miraculous expression of human creativity. But you wouldn't only see that if you knew the story of this device. You would also see the deforestation. You would see the toxic open pit mines. You would see the deformed children who are working like slaves in the mines. You'd see all that. When you looked at plastic, you would see the oil spill in the Niger River Delta. When you looked at a beautifully designed fashion item, you would see the teenage girls working in sweatshops in Cambodia or whatever. Nothing against Cambodia. This may not even be true. I don't even know if there's sweatshops in Cambodia. I myself don't know there's so many things that are off the radar that I don't know about and that I can sense but not really see when I look at one of these marvelous devices, including the devices that are right now pointing at my face called cameras. It's not about rejecting any of this, but it's about bringing all of the information in so that we can make a wise decision that includes everything and everybody. And that's why we need to expand the domain of what is political and go well beyond the issues that currently define politics as we know it. Bring more into the conversation.